But all the while, you hear a creature creeping up behind.
Mike's friend Alex was out varmint hunting in the White Mountains of northeastern Arizona with his two friends in 1990, when they quite literally ran into something inexplicable. Alex had always been somewhat quiet and soft-spoken, not one to make up stories, and was 4 years older than Mike. In school, he moved around in separate social circles, and would only really talk to Mike when he was passing through his neighborhood. This all establishes Alex's lack of propensity for lying, and thusly, Mike believed what might otherwise have been a fantastical story. This is that story. The White Mountains are one of the last mostly untouched regions in the wilds of Arizona, and so perhaps it is no wonder that they are seemingly one of the final bastions of the supernatural. Alex and his friends always used to go out varmint hunting in the region every summer, but once they had graduated from high school, their time to do this swiftly evaporated under the pressure of their new jobs and college work. However, after a 2-year separation, they all decided to get back together in 1990 for old times' sake. They knew about all the old urban legends surrounding the mountains, but they never encountered anything beyond a few drunken capers. The dark atmosphere that surrounded the stunning peaks only served to draw the boys into deeper areas of the secluded mountains. It was mid-autumn, and on this particular occasion, they had elected to use a newly purchased spotlight instead of flashlights, which would allow them to continue hunting for game deep into the night. They would do this by driving up and down the dirt roads while shining the dazzling spotlight into the woods to catch the glimmers of animalistic eye shine among the trees. It was normal to see a few wolves and many more coyotes hunting small animals to stock up for the coming winter. This night in particular, they spotted the yellow eye shine of roaming deer throughout the ponderosa pine forest, as well as some raccoons and skunks patrolling the secluded woodland roads. There were also quite a few coyotes lurking around in various hunting spots, and seeing as coyotes are legally considered varmints, which can be killed at any time of the year without a permit, the boys decided to shoot a few of them to pass the time, which seems rather sadistic when you say it like that. They used a hunting technique called leading, in which a beam of light is pointed just in front of the animal so that it follows it and thus accidentally positions itself within shooting distance. Using this method, they were able to lure 3 coyotes towards them, but eventually 2 of the 3 gave up and slunk back into the forest. One, however, seemed far more tenacious. They continued to bring it closer and closer to the road before the driver of the vehicle elected to test the interest of the coyote by slowly building up speed. Eventually, they got it to a speed of 35 miles per hour, and the coyote was still keeping pace with them in pursuit of the patch of light. The boys were amused by this, but they could eventually see the coyote starting to tire as they neared the end of the road. That particular road ended at an abandoned mine camp, and so they decided to shoot the animal before it had the chance to lose them in the camp. The gunshots sounded, and the animal collapsed by the side of the road. Backing the 4x4 up close to the carcass, the shooter jumped out to go and inspect his macabre handiwork. The coyote had its back to the group, and they all watched as the shooter poked at it with his rifle to ensure that it was dead. When the answer to this was affirmative, he curled his toe under the animal's body and flipped it over to face him. His face immediately paled and he gasped with terror. Wordlessly, he ran back to the truck and climbed into the back. The group had all seen what it was as well, It was something they would never forget. The body of a little Native American boy, 8 or 9 years of age, lay prone by the roadside. He had the skin of a coyote affixed to his back, tied to his wrists and ankles. The group was horrified to see the child get back up and dart back into the forest, as if it had never been shot at all. The group were horrified to see the child get back up and dart back into the forest, as if it had never been shot at all. Blind panic set in after that, and the group drove back home for the full 3.5-hour journey without ever stopping. As they were driving, they could hear the haunting yips of excited coyotes. 2 of the group now refused to go camping at all, and none of them would ever go back to the White Mountains, whether or not it was nighttime. They all knew that they had disturbed something otherworldly, and likely felt that they had seen something they really shouldn't have.
My name is Eli, and I'm 22 years old now. And I always loved being outdoors and in the woods. I remember about 9 years ago, when I was around 12 or 13, my family and I moved to Minnesota to help out my grandparents. They were getting up there in age and couldn't run the farm like they used to, and just for a change of scenery. A year or so after the move, my 2 brothers and I got into the habit of running around the edge of the woods along the backsides of the property and exploring where we probably shouldn't. With that, after school one day, me and my brothers got our stuff and made a 400 or 500 yard walk to the forest behind the house. My brothers decided to take off and run ahead about another 300 yards ahead of me, play tackling, and just being rambunctious teens. While I noticed a bundle of flowers that my grandmother would have loved. As I was looking at the flowers, I heard a bit of rustling in the woods, about 15 or 20 feet to my right. I didn't think too much about it because, it's the woods. So I shook my head and went to grab the bunch of flowers to give to my grandmother. No sooner as I reached my hand out to grab them, I heard, in my brother's voice, someone call my name for help. It sounded just like my little brother, except it was off a little bit, like it was being played by a recording. I immediately froze because as I looked up, I noticed my 2 brothers were ways ahead of me playing in the snow. I remember calling for them to hurry up and come with me to the house, and as I turned to run up to the house, I noticed a lone coyote moving in between some old beat-up trucks that my grandfather had parked in a pasture on the edge of the woods. But this coyote was considerably larger than anyone I've seen up until this point, and what struck me as odd was that this coyote looked like it got hit by a car, and I swear, when it moved around the trucks, it looked like it had its paws on the side of the truck, like it was trying to look over the truck at me. I couldn't help myself and yelled, "Hey!" to it, and sat for about a minute or less, just staring at each other. Before I could turn and start back walking to my house, I watched this thing lean around the truck and say in my brother's voice again, "Hey!" When this happened, I yelled for my brothers and booked it to the porch of the house. As my brothers got up to me, they noticed how pale I was and asked what was wrong. So I told them that I seen a mountain lion, scared of being ridiculed for seeing something so ridiculously frightening. Later that night, I was looking around the internet and found some other encounters by people all over the United States having similar stories, and came across an article about the skinwalkers, which was both terrifying and interesting. This isn't the only encounter I've had with such entities. I just wanted to get my story out there as a bit of a warning that there are things out there that don't really make sense to the human mind.
So I'll start off by mentioning I live in Oregon. Not quite a rural town, but our town is small and only about a 10-minute drive to what you would actually consider a rural town or area. Everyone's heard about the cryptids and lore of Oregon woods. I hate these woods. They're just vast and terrifying, but at the same time, tempting and beckoning almost. I stay out of the woods. I don't hunt or fish, and I might go hiking once every couple of years with friends, but I make it a point to not go where I don't feel safe. I kind of brushed off all the stories about the woods here until I had an experience of my own, and I'm ready to share what I saw that night. My friend and I work graveyard shift at a local bakery, and we always carpool. She picks me up at about 11:30 p.m. The bakery itself is in a more rural area, but the main road in town takes us almost all the way out there. It's a well-lit road until you get slightly out of town, and since it's the main road through town, there are usually passing cars or people walking, even at night. From my house, it takes about 10 minutes to get to work using this road. For about 3 months, this road was being repaved. We'd have to stop, literally, right before our turn into the bakery to wait for the construction crew to finish whatever project they were doing. After 2 nights of being stopped right outside of work for over an hour, and an estimated date of construction being done being 3 months out, we decided to start taking the back roads to work. The back way to work was on the opposite side of town of this main road. It took us out of town, around the outskirts of town, and finally to the bakery for a total of about 30 minutes travel time instead of 10. This back road was completely surrounded by heavy woods. There was a private drive to a house every 5 miles or so. No streetlights and no passing cars. No pedestrians either. This road was also extremely curvy. Just constant twists and turns. As expected, we'd see a lot of deer and the occasional possum, squirrel, etc. This particular night, we started our journey through the back roads, just as we had been all week. We got about 10 miles through when my friend went around this bend and then suddenly slammed on her brakes. I was on my phone, so I wasn't looking up when she saw it first. I look up and right in front of the car is this gigantic buck. I'm talking huge. Not moose-sized, but definitely one of the largest bucks I've ever seen. He was staring directly at us through the windshield. We were just kind of frozen for a moment for some reason. We both looked down at the feet of the deer, and in between its front feet was a dead raccoon. It was clearly a raccoon. Its face was pointed towards us, ringlets on the tail, basically a stereotypical raccoon. Except this thing was also huge. Now the buck was large, but large bucks aren't unheard of. This raccoon was the size of a huge dog, like the size of a mastiff. We looked back at the deer, and it was still staring right at us. Like it was making eye contact with us both. My friend flashes her high beams and honks the horn at it, hoping to scare it off. It doesn't run off. Without breaking eye contact with us, it starts to walk towards the car slowly. We both are freaked out at this point, and my friend throws the car in reverse, backs up and swerves around the deer. This entire time it moves its head to keep eye contact as we back up, pull to the side and drive away. We look back behind us and this thing is just standing in the road, staring at us as we drive away. We finally went around a curve and I lost sight of it. But until then, it never stopped staring right at us. We talk about this a lot, and about how weird it was. I didn't think deer ate meat. I'm not a deer expert, I just assumed they were herbivores. So the standing over the dead raccoon was the most unsettling part, even over the constant eye contact. Luckily, we weren't dumb enough to get out of the car, but I always wonder what would have happened if we did. Since then, I've been more aware of the law around here. I've heard unsettling noises and screams coming from the woods, but this was the only actual encounter I think I've had. Am I thinking too much into this? Or is it a little weird to anyone else? There's so many legends and stories of cryptids around here, and I'm sure you've all read about the messed up stuff that happens at Crater Lake. Just thought this might be an interesting encounter for someone to hear. No one else really believes us, but it's hard to believe something you didn't see with your own eyes.
For those who haven't read my first post, my name's Eli, 22 years old, and still am a pretty avid outdoorsman despite the events that have plagued me in the past. The events in this encounter happened not too far inside the Ocala National Forest in Central Florida, a skinwalker in Florida. Go figure, right? So, the day started with a phone call from my brother, who was asking to take a hike in the national forest outside of our town, and then to spend the night out there in hopes of doing a little fishing and roasting some marshmallows over a fire. It was me, my brother, and his girlfriend, who I see as my loving little sister, so it was gonna be a chill night. We left town and headed to the woods pretty early that day, and around 3 in the afternoon, we had gotten to our spot in the woods after 2 hours of riding around trying to find the perfect spot to set a tent. My brother, sister, and I decided to start the day with some fishing, so we grabbed our rods and a tackle box and headed for a little stream about a quarter mile from our camping spot. As we came close to the stream, we noticed an awful smell like rotten meat. When we came up to the river, we found the source of the smell, an abundance of dead fish all around the edge of the stream, and seen that the water had a nasty rust-colored tint to it. When we were done gagging at the sight and smell of what was in front of us, a huge sense of dread washed over me, with an uncomfortable feeling of being watched. My sister noticed and asked what was wrong, so I played it off with a joke and suggested that we go make the fire and set up the tent. So I shrugged it off, not wanting to frighten her. After another 30-minute hike from the stream back to the campground, my brother and sister started collecting wood for the fire, while I started to set the tent up. I set the tent up around the same time they came back with enough wood to have a fire last a long while. So we got the fire lit, and I admit it was a damn good fire, and we decided to start roasting some marshmallows. Before I could eat any, I had to take a leak, so I told them that I was gonna step into the woods for a second to pee. I walked about 30 feet into the woods and started to relieve myself when I heard my sister say, "Hello." Finding this extremely odd, I looked around and didn't see anyone or anything, so I went back to my business. As I was zipping up my zipper, I heard her say again, "Hey." Thinking they were pranking me, I rushed back to the campground to find them still roasting marshmallows over the fire. Kind of freaked out, I asked them if they were messing with me, to which they frowned and explained that they've been in the same spot since I went into the woods. Now terrified, they saw how ghost-white I turned and asked me if everything was all right. So I told them what I heard, and they suggested that we go into the tent and go to bed early. So that's what we did. After already taking a while to fall asleep, I woke up in the middle of the night to underbrush crunching right outside our tent, and the horrible smell from earlier was back, worse than before. For the fear of scaring the hell out of my brother and sister, I decided not to wake them up. As I sat there shaking and sweating, I noticed the sound of twigs snapping had stopped, and I began to hear what I could swear loud, raspy and heavy breathing, like something was trying to sniff out our tent. I quietly tried to lay back down and cover my ears so I couldn't hear the breathing anymore, and eventually I fell back asleep. The next morning, we woke up late, so we decided to start packing up our belongings and head home. When we got out of the tent, the first thing we noticed was our cooler was tore up and thrown upside down against a tree, with everything that was in it strewn throughout the campsite. Another thing I noticed when I was rolling the tent up was a ton of footprints. Weird footprints that almost looked like normal, except for obvious claw marks above each toe. Once I spotted these, I hurried up putting the tent in my truck and got my brother, sister, and myself out of there as quickly and as safely as I could. As of yet, I haven't been back camping in any kinds of woods, and I can't imagine coming across another one of these things.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. A huge thank you to Miss Creepy Tales for joining me on this one. If you enjoyed her narrations, please go over and check out her channel because she really is a fantastic narrator and a good friend of mine. So this one came out a little bit later than expected. Sorry about that, I actually just lost track of time. I didn't realize it was so long between the last video. I'd been trying to edit this one for the last couple of days, but I just kept falling asleep during editing. But it's all done now and I hope you enjoyed it. A huge thank you goes to all of the Redditors who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you'd like to help support this channel, there's a couple of options down in the description below, so be sure to check that out. And as always, a huge thank you to all of you for continuing to support me. And remember,
Papa loves you.